occurs between the ages 7 and 12. So now we're going to talk about the cognitive development in middle childhood. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the Piagetian approach to cognitive development. With the Piagetian approach to cognitive development, he believed that children move from the pre-operational stage to the concrete operational stage, which occurs between the ages 7 and 12, and it's characterized by the use of active and appropriate use of logic. They use their cognitive and logical processes to answer questions now, and they're no longer influenced solely by appearance. So what that means is now when children are handed two cups, and they're different sizes, and then they're asked which cup has more water, they now know not to just guess by just the way the cups appear. They're starting to use logic and reasoning to determine the answer. They learn a new thing called decentering, and that is they become less egocentric, and they can take multiple aspects of a situation into account. And they also attain the concept of reversibility. And what that means now is that, for example, children, when they see a ball of clay morph into a snake, they now know that when it changes into a snake, it's still clay, it just looks different. And they also understand that with numbers, they understand that the order of it doesn't really matter if it's the same number. So 5 plus 3 is 8. They understand that 3 plus 5 is 8, and they know that 8 minus 3 is 5, and so on and so forth. Children in this stage also are slowly starting to understand the relationships between time, speed, and distance. For example, children were shown this picture of two cars that started and finished at the same time, but they went different routes. And during this age, children understand now that one car was going faster than the other, and they understand that they can travel at different speeds. But children in the pre-operational stage would think that they went the same speed. Piaget's understanding. He underestimated children's capabilities. He also underestimated when children's cognitive abilities emerge. They actually can emerge earlier than he thought. And the concrete operational stages, it isn't universal. Early cross-culture research seems to imply that children in certain cultures never left the pre-operational stages and failed to master conversation and to develop the concrete operational. So basically that means that some children never make it out of the pre-operational with the information processing approach. Children become more sophisticated in handling their information. Their brains are like computers, because they can process more data as the size of their memory increases. With memory, there's three parts of memory. There's encoding, storage, and retrieval. With encoding, it's transforming information into a form that can be stored. And when moving on to storing, it's maintaining the encoded information in the memory, and with retrieving, it reaccesses information from the past. Next is a three-system approach to memory. There are three different memory storage systems or stages that describe how information is processed in order for it to be recalled. And the first one is sensory, and that is memory stored that only lasts for an instant. Next is short-term memory, and it's also known as working memory, and its information is stored for 15 to 25 seconds. And then long-term memory is when memory is stored permanently, although it's kind of hard to do. You got to keep practicing and everything to get the memory stored in long-term memory. Meta-memory is the understanding of the processes that underlie memory. As children grow older, they engage in control strategies that help them remember information. They do that through rehearsal, organize, mnemonics, keywords, and cognitive elaboration. With rehearsal, they just rehearse things over and over again, or they can speak it out loud over and over again until they remember. With organize, they organize materials in a certain way to help them remember. With mnemonics, it's kind of like organized. It's a formal technique for organizing information in a way that makes it more likely, for them to remember. With keywords, children will put words that look the same, or they link words and that sound the same to help them remember it. And then with cognitive elaboration, children use pictures or images to help them remember information. With Vygotsky's approach to cognitive development in classroom instruction, Vygotsky believed that the nature of the interactions between students and teachers must be carefully structured to fall within each individual child's ZPD. ZPD is a zone of proximal development, and it's the level at which children can almost but not quite understand performance tasks. So what he means is children will understand more with performing a task if they interact with other students or teachers. It helps them remember. Through cooperative learning, it is a learning technique in which children work together in groups to achieve a common goal. The benefits for cooperative learning is children, if one child veers off into the wrong direction, they can be brought back together with their peers, by their peers, and individuals benefit most when at least one of their other members of the group are more competent at the task and can act as the expert or act as a teacher. With reciprocal teaching, students, it's a technique to teach reading comprehension strategies where students are taught to skim passages or reading, and that will raise questions about the central point, and then they can summarize the passage and then predict what will happen, so they can teach, so they can become the teacher and teach their peers. Language development. When children are around the age 6, their vocabulary is about 8 to 14,000 words. But when they grow up, they gain another 5,000 words between the ages of 9 and 11. Understanding language. Children's passive voice is rare during this stage. And then children will understand syntax, which is just how they know how to form sentences now. And with phonemics, most children pronounce words about pretty accurately, but some words and sounds, it's kind of still hard for them to pronounce, and that's called phonemics. And those syllables or words are like J, V, TH, and ZH. Intonation. Student-age children also will have difficulty decoding sentences when the meaning depends on tone of voice. For example, considering the sentence, George gave a book to David, he gave one to Bill. If the word he is emphasized, the meaning is George gave a book to David and David gave a different book to Bill. But if the annotation emphasizes the word and, then the meaning changes to George gave a book to David and George also gave a book to Bill. So children still have a hard time understanding that. With pragmatics, those are basically just, they can have actual conversations with people. With the pre-operational stage, pragmatics, children really didn't one student would say something, and then another student will say something completely different that's not based off the conversation. But now children can have logical conversations, and they'll actually respond back to the question or answer or what a child is asking. For example, now if a child said, "I didn't know what to get Tim for his birthday," and then a child could be like, "You could get him a race car," but in pre-operational stages, the person responding would probably have nothing to do with what the person asked. Metalinguistic awareness is understanding of one's own use of language. It helps children achieve comprehension when information becomes fuzzy. Younger children, when they were asked questions or if something didn't make sense, they wouldn't ask questions, they would just try to do it on their own. But as children get older, they start to, if something doesn't make sense, they'll start to ask questions, or they'll raise their hand and they'll ask questions to the teacher so they can actually do it. And language promotes self-control. In an experiment, when children were told they could have one marshmallow if they eat it right now, or they could have 2 marshmallows if they wait. Children who were 4, they looked at the marshmallow. Children who were 6, they sang and they talked to themselves so they could distract themselves so they could get 2. And when they were 8, they focused on how it looked than how it tasted. So language promotes self-control, because as they're talking to themselves, it helps control them so they wouldn't eat the marshmallow so they could get 2. Bilingualism. Bilingualism is when you speak 2 or more languages. And there are 2 approaches for bilingual children. There's bilingual education, and then there's immersion. With bilingual education, children are taught in their native language while learning English. So they're basically taught both English and then their native language at the same time. With immersion, their teaching is only solely on English, and they are provided with minimal instruction in their native language. So with immersion, it may be difficult for a student to learn a new skill if those skills are being taught in a second language. They wouldn't be able to understand. So many believe that the bilingual education is the better approach. Benefits to learning a second language: you have a greater metalinguistic awareness, better self-control, and your brain is more efficient. Emotional intelligence. Schooling is more universal in the United States than in the other countries. In other countries, schooling is very hard, and a lot of children don't have the opportunity to have an education. And women suffer more than males. The set of skills that underlie the accurate assessment, evaluation, expression, and regulations of emotions is the definition of the emotional intelligence. And they are empathy, self-awareness, social skills, caring, and friendship. With school readiness, scientists have researched, they've shown that delaying your child's entry may actually affect your child in a negative way in the future. There are 5 stages of the reading development. First stage being pre-reading, and that is from birth to 1st grade, and children learn letters and learn how to write their names. The second stage is the initial reading, or decoding, and that's between 1st to 2nd grade, and they start reading. Stage 2, confirmation and fluency. It's between the ages in 2nd grade to 3rd grade, and they read out loud fluently, but they don't understand what they're reading. Stage 3, it's also known as learning the new, and that is between 4th and 8th grade, and they use reading as a means of learning. With stage 4, they multiple viewpoints. It's between ages 8th grade and beyond, and it's understanding reading in a term of reflecting multiple point of views. How should we teach reading? Well, there has been a debate on it, and there's 2 types. There are code-based and there are whole language. With code-based, its reading should be taught by presenting the basic skills that underlie reading. So they emphasize the components of reading, such as the sounding of letters and the combination, and how the letters are combined to make words. With whole language, its reading is viewed as a natural process, similar to the acquisition of oral language. Children should learn how to read through exposure of writing, sentences, poems, and stories. It helps them learn by guessing and sending out the words. The expectation effects. With this, scientists found that teachers treat children for whom they have expectations of improvement differently from those who have no such expectations. And there has been there's been 2 experiments. There's been the Bloomer effect, which basically teachers were told that a certain amount of students were very smart, intelligent, and they're going to thrive. So teachers would teach the students who they thought were smarter better than the students that they were just average or below average. And the teacher expectancy effect, it's a phenomenon whereby an educator's experience expectations for a given child actually bring about the expected behavior. Multicultural education. The goal is to help students from minority cultures develop competence in the control of the majority group while maintaining positive group identity that build up their own culture. In culture assimilation, the model is enriched. The goal of the education is to simulate individual culture identities into a unique, unified American culture. In practice, for example, non-English speaker students were discouraged from speaking their native tongue and were totally immersed into English, so they were taught to only speak in English. With pluralistic society, they believe that American society is made up of a diverse, co-equal cultures that should preserve their identity, individual features. So that replaced the cultural assimilation model, because the cultural assimilation model was forcing non-English speakers to become English speakers. Teachers in the pluralistic society emphasize the dominant culture and discourage students who were non-native speakers from using their native tongue. This had the effect to lowering students' self-esteem. And with materials that students had to buy or they used to look over, they never really featured specific events and understanding of which meant some children never saw examples representing their important of their background. So basically it means that a lot of the books and textbooks never really talked about different cultures rather than, African American and then whites. So it came to the conclusion that students representing diverse cultures enriched and broadened the educational experience of all students. So what that means is teachers and everyone believe that everyone should be taught about different cultures, because when you are taught different cultures, you learn more and you're better fit for the world, because when you're in the real world, there's different cultures. Well, bicultural identity, that just means the maintenance of one's original culture identity while becoming integrated into the majority culture. So basically they are, you can have two different cultures. You can be bicultural. Bi means two. There are different types of schools, schooling systems. Most children in the U.S. are educated in public schools that are paid for by taxes. But there are a few drawbacks. Some schools are underfunded and do not have the materials or programs necessary to provide a good educational experience for all who attend. And those with special needs or learning disabilities or are gifted may not get the attention they need. So some parents seek alternative schools to traditional schools, with one being a private school. A private school may offer smaller classes and more programs for their students in public schools. They're able to select to attend the so like with private schools, they can choose who they accept to come in. So that means that they usually weed out students who are very disruptive or bad because they don't want them in there. And with private schools, parents have to pay like tuition to go there. And they tend to be less racially diverse in public schools. Charter schools are independently run public schools that families can volunteer and choose. They voluntarily choose for their children. They're often small and sometimes have a particular focus, such as on arts, science, or a particular language. Charter schools are authorized by the state, and they are frequently started by parents, community leaders, or members, or other groups. And they are supported by public funds so that they're free to students, so that students don't have to pay to go there. And homeschooling is another type, and it's when students are taught at home by their parents. And that could be for many reasons. One reason might be that the parents believe that they can teach better than teachers at school, or they're homeschooled due to religious beliefs. Intelligence. Intelligence is defined as the capacity to understand the world, think rationally, and use sources effectively when faced with challenges. And the Binet's test was he was the first to really discover like how smart people are by he performed this test that he tested to find people's like mental age. And this test was a trial and error process in which items and tasks were given to students who've been previously identified by their teachers as being extremely smart or bright or dull. The tasks that did not discriminate between the two groups were discarded, and he found out that your mental age should be around your physical age. So scores above the average for your age, you had a higher mental age than physical, or physical also known as your chronological age. And scores lower meant that you were lower than your physical age. Your mental age was lower than your physical age. Discovered your mental age or your actual age, aka, and that's also known as the IQ, the intelligence quotient. He did your mental age divided by your chronological age or your physical age, and he multiplied it by 100. And then what number he got, he then used this chart, and that would give you your IQ. And then he used this chart, and people who scored above the average, which the average is 100, then their mental age was higher than their chronological age. But if they were lower than the average, then the mental age was lower than the physical age. And there are a few different types of the IQ test. And one, like I said, was the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale, which it was a test that consists of a series of items that varied according to the age of the person being tested. So, for instance, younger children were asked like simpler questions about everyday activities or be able to copy a complex figure. The older children were asked to explain proverbs or do math problems for around their age, and this test tended to get harder and harder as the more questions they were answering until the child was unable to answer, and then that would give them their IQ score. The Welsh-Shirley Intelligence Score was a test for children that provides separate measurements of a verbal and performance skill as well as the total score. The verbal tasks are traditionally word problems that test such skills as understanding a passage, rather than the typical number copying a complex design arranged pictures in a logical order. And the separation portions allowed it to be easier to identify like specific problems a child may have. For example, a significantly higher score on the performance part of the test than on the verbal can indicate the child may have difficulties in linguistic development. In the Kaufman assessment, it was an intelligence test that measures children's ability to integrate different stimulus simultaneously in step-by-step thinking. So they had to be very flexible. It allowed the person given the test to use alternate wording or gestures or even more supported questions in a different language. So it could be differentiated between languages. And it makes tests more valid and adequate for children to whom English as a second language. So basically that means that this test was mainly for children who did not speak English or English was their second language. Group differences when it comes to the IQ scores or the intelligence of children, there are many reasons why they're different. One being fairness. So, for example, when taking the IQ test, suppose a child living in a rural area is asked about subways, and then a child that lives in an urban area is asked about the mating practices of sheep. They would both do poorly because they both wouldn't know. So if questions such as these are included in the IQ test, then the test could rightfully be viewed as a measurement of prior experiences rather than intelligence. When biased, most traditional IQ measurements have been constructed using white, middle class, or English speakers as test subjects. And children from different class or cultural backgrounds perform poorly because the test questions are biased in favor of the majority group. The bell curve controversy was a book written, and the people argued that the average 15-point difference between the whites and African American on the IQ test is due to hereditary rather than environmental factors. They also argued that the IQ difference was different because people living in higher rate of poverty would perform poorly. But IQ is actually seen as a product of both nature and nurture interacting with another in complex manner. So rather than seeing intelligence as produced by either genes or experiences, genes are considered to affect experiences, and experiences are viewed as influencing the expression of genes. And the psychologists actually found evidence that although environmental factors played a larger role in influencing the IQ of poor children, genes are more influenced in the IQ of rich children. Alternative conceptions of intelligence. The intelligent tests used most frequently in school settings today are based on the idea that intelligence is a single factor and a unitary mental ability. The G factor, it's assumed to underlie performances on every aspect of intelligence. I just believe that there are two kinds of intelligence: fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. With fluid intelligence, it reflects information processing abilities, reasoning, and memory. For example, a student is asked to remember a set of numbers. That is like an example of the fluid intelligence because they're being asked to remember a pattern. With crystallized intelligence, it's the accumulation of information, skills, and strategies that people have learned throughout their experiences, and they can apply and problem solve use problem solving in the situations. So crystallized is just the information and skills that students have learned throughout their time. And then an example, they could use that while they can read a book, and they can do that. Like reading a book will help them. Like they can read a book because throughout the skills that they've learned, they were taught how to read. Dynamic assessment is intelligence is seen as being reflected not only in how children can perform on their own, but also in terms of how well they perform when helped by adults. In problem solving, like I said, problem solving processes show that people with higher intelligence levels differ from others not only in the number of problems they ultimately are able to see, but also in their methods of solving the problem. So people who have a higher IQ or higher intelligence, they are better at problem solving. The triarchy theory of intelligence, it's the belief that intelligence consists of three aspects of information processing: the componential element, the experimental element, and the contextual element. In the componential element, it reflects how efficiently people can process and analyze information. People in this group allows people to interfere with relationships among different parts of a problem, and then they solve the problem, and then they evaluate there's a solution. They tend to score higher on the traditional test of intelligence. The experimental element, the insightful component of intelligence, they can easily compare new material with what they have already known and can combine and reflect facts that they already know in a creative way, so they are more creative. And the contextual element, it concerns practical intelligence or ways of dealing with the demand of everyday environments. Intellectual disabilities. Approximately 1 to 3% of the school-age population is considered to be intellectually disabled. Intellectual disability is defined as a significantly sub-average level of intellectual functioning that occurs with relative limits in two or more skill areas. Some people with intellectual disability, it could be caused by genetic factors. And one genetic factor is there's Down syndrome, which is when there is a extra chromosome. And also intellectual disabilities can be caused by prenatal illnesses, such as the fetal alcohol syndrome. That's basically when a mother is consuming alcohol while she is pregnant, and that can cause birth defects. Different types of intellectual disabilities. With mild, again, it's about 85% of the population, and they can generally learn to read, write, and math skills between 3 and 6th grade levels, the 3rd to 6th grade levels, and they may have jobs and live independently, so that's not too bad. Moderate, it's about 10% of the population, and they may be able to read and write, but it requires some types of oversight and supervision. Severe is about 5% of the intellectual disability population, and they're probably not able to read or write. Although they may learn self-help skills and routines, they're always required supervision. And profound, they require intensive support, and they may have a medical condition, and that's about 1% of intellectual disability population. With gifted and talented children, it's 3 to 5% of school-age children who are gifted and talented present special challenges of their own. Children are considered gifted and talented if they give enhanced of high performance capabilities in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, leadership, or specific academic fields, and who require services or activities not ordinarily provided by the student or the school in order to fully develop such capabilities. So basically that means that children who are called gifted or talented, they exceed, they're above average, and they learn in different ways that require more information, because the average is almost too easy for them. And there are a few stereotypes of children who are considered gifted and talented, and some of them being that they're unsociable or they're poorly adjusted to school. But researchers suggest that they're actually outgoing, well-adjusted to school, and quite popular. They found that gifted people are not just smarter than the average boy or student. They were also healthier, better coordinated, and they're physically just better adjusted. And there are two approaches to teaching. There's acceleration and then there's enrichment. The acceleration, it allows gifted students to move above and ahead at their own pace, even if that means skipping another level. So it means that if a child is doing really good and there's really no need for them to go, for instance, if they move from third grade if they're moving to third grade to fourth grade, and they already know all the information for fourth grade, they might accelerate and just skip the fourth grade and go to fifth grade. With enrichment, students are kept in their grade level, but they're enrolled in special programs and given individual activities to allow greater depth of given topics. Material is provided differs in timing of its presentation and its specification, and it also encourages higher thinking. So that just means that the kid or the child will not skip a grade, but they will learn newer or harder material, so it helps them learn better in their grade, but they'll stay in their grade. And this cute little picture, it's just it shows acceleration and enrichment, and with the acceleration, it's saying the kid's moving up.